Look at almost any defensive position in history, and the first thing you notice is usually the wall. But the wall was never really the point. Military defenses are machines for controlling movement and time. Some stop armies outright, others squeeze them into narrow spaces, slow them down, expose them to fire, or deliberately let them advance until they are exhausted. And across thousands of years, most defenses have relied on 5 basic ideas. Natural defenses. The oldest defense requires almost no construction at all. Mountains don't necessarily stop armies. They tell them where they're allowed to go. A river forces soldiers toward bridges and crossings. Mountains squeeze troops and vehicles into passes. Marshes can swallow roads, horses, wagons, and heavy equipment. Suddenly, an army that could approach from almost anywhere has only a handful of realistic routes left. That is what makes terrain so powerful. The defender doesn't need to protect every kilometer. Geography has already removed most of the enemy's options. But natural defenses have one obvious weakness. Eventually, someone finds another crossing, or another road, or they simply bring enough engineers to create one. So humans started manufacturing geography of their own. Walls and castles. A wall is basically an artificial cliff. A ditch is an artificial ravine. A tower creates artificial high ground, and a castle combines all of them into one extremely annoying obstacle. But the greatest weapon of a castle was not stone, it was time. An invading army might be able to march 20 kilometers tomorrow, put a fortress in its way, and suddenly that same army can spend weeks sitting outside one position, eating through supplies, losing men, and waiting for siege equipment. And the more layers defenders added, the worse it became. Cross one ditch, now there's a wall. Break through that wall, there's another defensive position behind it. The attacker keeps moving forward, but every step costs more. At places such as Dover Castle, defenses evolved over centuries as new walls, earthworks, and firing positions were added around older structures. But eventually, someone arrived with a weapon castles were never designed to survive: cannons. Constantinople. Few cities showed the power of walls better than Constantinople. For centuries, enormous land defenses protected the city from attacking armies. Then, in 1453, Sultan Mehmed II arrived with Ottoman troops, ships, and powerful artillery. His cannons battered sections of the walls. The defenders repaired them. The cannons fired again. But Constantinople had another layer of protection. A huge chain stretched across the Golden Horn, blocking Ottoman ships from entering the harbor. So Mehmed simply went around it, not by sea, by land. Ottoman ships were hauled overland and launched behind the chain. Now the defenders had even more coastline to worry about, while artillery continued hammering the land walls. After weeks of fighting, Constantinople fell on May 29th. The walls had not suddenly become badly designed. The weapons attacking them had changed, and defensive architecture had to change with them. Bastion forts. Gunpowder made tall walls a liability, so engineers stopped trying to make fortresses taller. They made them lower, thicker, and much stranger. Earthworks helped absorb artillery impacts. Walls became angled instead of simply running in straight lines. And then engineers started adding giant points sticking out from the fortress. These were bastions. Their purpose was simple. If an attacker reached the base of a normal straight wall, defenders could struggle to fire along its sides. A bastion fixed that. Soldiers positioned on one section could fire across the face of another, turning supposedly safe corners into killing zones. Then came outerworks, ditches, firing positions, and even more angles. From above, the fortress started looking like a star. That shape was not decoration. It was geometry built around gunpowder. Places such as Fort McHenry used this basic idea, with projecting bastions allowing defenders to cover approaches around the fort instead of leaving easy blind spots beside straight walls. But even these fortresses had a problem. They were expensive. They took years to build. And armies did not always fight exactly where someone had conveniently placed a giant stone star. So soldiers discovered a much cheaper fortress: a hole. Trenches and field fortifications. Instead of building upward, dig downward. A trench can turn ordinary dirt into protection from bullets, shell fragments, and observation. And unlike a castle, soldiers can build one almost anywhere. That means the fortress can move with the army. One trench by itself is not especially terrifying. The real problem begins when you combine it with everything else. Barbed wire slows attackers. Machine guns punish exposed infantry. Artillery hits concentrations of troops. Bunkers protect defenders. Then another trench waits behind the first one, and another position behind that. Now an attacker has to leave cover, cross obstacles under fire, capture the first line, and somehow keep moving before the defenders farther back react. The cheapest defensive material on Earth had become dirt, and modern weapons made standing above it extremely dangerous. Defense in depth, which leads to the fifth idea. Stop trying to defend one perfect line, build several. Defense in depth works by making the attacker solve the same problem again and again. The first obstacle slows them, strongpoints funnel them, artillery punishes concentrations, secondary positions catch breakthroughs, then reserves hit whatever is left. The goal is not always to stop the enemy at the first line. Sometimes the defender expects that line to fall. The attacker advances, but every kilometer burns fuel, ammunition, time, and manpower. In other words, the battlefield itself becomes a machine for weakening whoever moves through it. And this is where one of history's most misunderstood defensive systems comes in, the Maginot Line. It is usually remembered with one sentence: Germany simply went around it, which is technically true, but also misses the point. France never expected the fortified line to cover every possible route into the country. Part of its purpose was to discourage a direct German attack across the heavily fortified frontier and push fighting elsewhere. In 1940, German forces made their decisive breakthrough through the Ardennes, while major Allied forces had moved north into Belgium. The strongest fortifications were never destroyed in some dramatic frontal assault. They were bypassed. And that reveals something important. A defense can work perfectly at the local level, still fail strategically, because no wall, trench, or fortress matters if the enemy simply finds a battlefield where it no longer matters. Mountains, castles, star forts, trenches, and layered defensive systems look completely different, but they are all trying to do roughly the same thing: control where the enemy moves, control how quickly they get there, and make every meter cost more than it should. The strongest defense was never simply the wall nobody could break. It was the battlefield that forced an attacker to waste so much time, strength, and momentum that breaking through stopped being worth the price. Subscribe to GeoSticks for more of the geography hiding underneath history.